Cool, right, I'm on.
Hey everybody, Raw the Lions UK, Matthew Turner, Stephen Collins, I say over there, but I haven't reversed my screen, so it's over there. We're just waiting
I'm
for
over here.
we're just waiting for Carl Krabs to pop in with us from Locked On NFL Scouting. Hope you're all well, you've had a good week. It's been an interesting day to be a Lions fan.
Yeah, do you remember all that stuff about how we've won the off season? I think we might have to reconsider that now.
What a bet.
Yeah, it's one of those sobering days when, that wave of hopium sweeps by, and then for some reason you get a come down, and today's been one of those days.
It is one of those days. Hey to everyone in the chat, Mike the Marine, Lions Gangster, Dan McGuinness, Giovanni Lions 2. Just to address this off the top, and I will say it in the podcast episode, like when we start recording as well, we're not going to mention the betting scandal that came out today. The only references we'll make to it are how it affects the draft, because we're here to interview Kyle. We'll address the betting shit on the fallout of this on Monday's show, which is not the betting show. It's not the betting show. The betting show is Wednesday. We've got a Monday episode in between. Derek Barbaric in the chat saying, ugh, this is not the news we wanted. It's true, and it sucks. Just quickly to address it now before Carl gets in. The most disappointing thing for me, the most impactful thing, is the coaches who have left. I don't know who it is yet. I don't think it's been revealed who the coaches are who've been fired yet. But the coaches, for me, the senior people in the building, are the ones that foster the culture. I'm glad that... It's a stupid rule. I don't agree with the rule. But given that those are the rules, and that everyone knows what the rules are, the senior people should be leading from the front. So, disappointed at the lack of culture there. Glad that we've shown strong leadership in terms of getting rid of them. I feel for the young guys, because they should know better, but they're still young men. The senior guys are not, the coaches. So, they're the ones I'm disappointed at. For JMO, obviously he had a year worth of injury, mostly. Having another 6 games out is not ideal. But in the scheme of a 5-year Lions career at minimum, 6 games is a drop in the ocean. He's got time to redeem himself, but he has to know he has to work bloody hard now. And he already did anyway, but yeah. Any thoughts, Steve?
I mean, it sucks. It's not a great start, particularly if we've got, I think, some divisional games in those first 6 fixtures. That's going to particularly suck. Because those are the games we don't want to lose, and we want to hit the ground running. We want to build on the momentum from the end of the last season. We want a really good winning run, and we don't want anything to kind of break up that momentum. Having said that, probably the most tiresome thing about today is just that overreaction. And I turned on Twitter and then had to just look away, because there was just nonsense been talked. And like I said, it's not a massive deal, but people were already kind of gnashing their teeth and wailing, and then there was the overreaction to the overreaction, and then it's just very tiresome. So I think we've talked about it for 2 minutes, and we should move on, because there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, I don't think that... Oh, Kyle is coming. There we go. I didn't think he'd see my message. Oh, man. What a day. What a day to... What a bit of news to slightly overshadow the interview we're about to do. I swear, I think it's just going to be what people was interested in the whole time. Hey, Kyle.
Kyle saved us from talking about Jameson Williams any longer.
We don't need to talk about Jameson Williams and all that kind of stuff. We can talk about the draft if you guys want, and keep it entertaining and not depressing. And I'm as a big Jameson Williams guy, I'm not sad at all that we're not going to miss him for the first 5 games of the season either. So what's going on, guys?
How's it going?
Yeah, real good.
I can't believe that you're here. I've been trying to get you on for a long time. I know that you're a busy man. So
busy guy. Parenthood does that to a man, but the draft does that to a man. But it's good to catch up with you guys. Excited to talk about Lions.
Yeah, definitely. All right. I know that we haven't got too long, so shall we crack on? You guys ready?
Yeah.
wherever you want to go.
Right.
Recording in progress.
Welcome to a special edition of the Roar of the Lions UK podcast. I'm Matthew Turner alongside Stephen Collins. And what's better than this? Sorry, Carl. But a draft dude is on the show. Carl Krabs, host of Locked On NFL Scouting and Locked On Dolphins, formerly founded the Draft Network and NDT Scouting, which predates me, Carl. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I know, Matt, we've kind of been playing the tag game a little bit, or you've been playing the tag game with me. So I'm here to make do and excited to talk some Lions football with you guys and the UK fan base. I love seeing football gain so much traction elsewhere and have so many avid fans, and heading overseas for a game is definitely on my to-do list, and rub elbows with you guys soon before long, hopefully.
Hopefully. I mean, maybe one day the Lions will come back. It's been almost a decade, and we're due our time. So anyway, to start with, I just wanted to talk about you, Carl, actually, to begin with, because I think how you've kind of come into this is really interesting before maybe talking a bit about the Lions and then moving on to the draft, as obviously,
Sure.
that's what you do. So you did your bachelor's in kinesiology and exercise science at Penn State. So you know Big Ten football quite well. Did you always know that you wanted to kind of transition from that into football stuff? Because it didn't take you long to start NDT.
No. So I didn't get a chance to play in college. I got hurt my senior year of high school. I was going to try to walk on at like a Division II school. I wasn't any good, but that was kind of the mourning process of that is like, well, I know I'm not done with the game, but how can I make the game fit within the confines of going to college and getting an education? And I had met somebody who has since gone on to have a very successful career. And he at the time had gotten hired by an NFC North team, ironically enough, as an area scout. And he had said, hey, man, you got a pretty good foundation here in your education. Kind of gives you a unique way to see players and watch how players move. And you should try to create a portfolio and go for it. And that's really what I did was trying to, in the free time that I had amidst my education and an original 9 to 5 when I first got out of college, all of my free time was dived into trying to create a portfolio, to create a platform. To the original goal was to be hired by a team, and all of my opportunities kind of came on the media side of things. So once you embrace that and lean into that, it's taken me on quite the journey over the last, I guess, so almost 10 years now.
Yeah, that's crazy to think. I know I hear you and Joe always say that you're in your dream job, and that's just that's peak life. I can't imagine feeling like that. I hope my existing colleagues are not listening to me say that. Hey,
we're in our dream job, Matt, at Royal Lions.
Yes, this definitely pays enough for my work, for my life. So talk to me about the start, because I knew you through the Draft Network, as I suspect a lot of people did. Coincidentally, NDT and TDN ending and starting at the same time. I'm not actually aware of how that process started. So talk to me about NDT and then the transition into TDN. Was that just kind of like an evolution of the business? Did it kind of get taken on by some other people, or like the whole thing?
When I started on my own, it was really just like anybody else trying to create a platform, and I had a blog spot website, something small, and through networking and going to events, the first kind of business venture that we had there was consulting with agents about low-end draft prospects and potential UDFAs that they were interested in representing, and wanted a set of eyes to take a look at that. So, of course, over the course of the first 3 years, we almost exclusively did that, and then a draft guide at the end of the year. And then as we kind of scaled and grew, we had media partnerships and we started doing content. And once we started doing content, then we got interest from an investor that came in. They came over the top. They invested. They essentially acquired NDT, and it became the Draft Network. And that was how Draft Network was born, was me and some of the crew that we had there originally, with some fresh faces brought in and an investor over the top.
That's so, like, I actually went onto the NDT Scouting website, because that still exists, and
still
it's
there.
It's a heck of a time capsule. Like the last article, I think, is from like June 2018. You can't click on most of the links, but it's quite fun to have a look at the context of what you're talking about and what's there. It's really, really funny. So you now, obviously, you were there for 5 years at TDN, left just a month ago, which was, I think, a shock to a lot of people at the time, but you've effectively transitioned the show quite similarly to Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes with Joe, and carrying on much as you were kind of before with Draft Dudes. How have you found moving into what you're doing now?
I think the big thing for us was, as we decided to transition and pivot, was to find a new angle to continue to try to stay fresh and to try to continue to have the same conversations through a different lens. And a lot of what we did with Draft Dudes was in the weeds, the minutia of it all, player by player. Whereas Locked On NFL Scouting is more of a top-down conversation where you're looking at it from the big picture more often than you are talking about the refined fundamentals of a player and how this edge defender utilizes his hands to deconstruct blocks, or what his third step in his initial charge up the field for his pass rush sets up and how well he pivots off of his initial rush play and all. Like, you kind of transition away from that, and it's more, okay, like, here's why your team is making the decisions that they are. And here's what we think are the decisions that they should make based on an objective viewpoint of where your team is in everybody's individual journey to try to build the best possible roster that they can.
I think from my perspective as a listener, one of the everydayers that you refer to as off the show, I think when I listened to the Draft Dudes, I heard a collection of scouts pool knowledge. Whereas now I think it's the evolution of that is you've gone up into the front office and you're now the general manager managing those guys, and like, what are we taking from this and everything else is going on in the organization, and how does that fit in? A lot of your episodes, you started in the midst of the draft, and actually a lot of the episodes have been about specific decisions that someone is having to make, or someone's kind of declared that they wanted a trade, and how does that fit into the balance of everything. So it's like you're trying to be the general manager now, I think. Is that kind of what you're going for? The same conversation in a different lens?
Yeah, it's obviously general managers have a lot more on their plate than just scouting the players, right? So all of those factors that feed into, building a team, it's a lot more economics. It's a lot more strategy. There's a lot more historical precedent. We're scouting an individual college player. You can do comparisons and have historical precedent as well, but it's putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think that's kind of been the thing about the journey that Joe and I have been on, is it's kind of just been this gradual education of meeting people and being students of the game and asking questions and never going into a conversation, not seeking to learn something from the person that you're engaging with, whether it's a podcast or a former executive or a player that you meet or someone else in media. We all have different perspectives, and across the course of the 8 years that I've worked alongside Joe, we've had a tremendous amount of opportunities to talk to people like Jim Nagy and Ozzie Newsome and Phillip Rivers just this past year, and the list goes on and on and on. And having those conversations have kind of allowed us, as we've committed ourselves to learn more about the game, to kind of build our own pillars of what our beliefs are, but then understanding that all of the 32 viewpoints across the league are going to be different than our viewpoints too. And I think that's the beauty of the whole thing that we're trying to tackle.
Sometimes it feels like you're zigging when everyone else is zagging, because you're trying to keep it informative, but there's still that entertainment, where as a lot of other draft podcasts, it's more about reaction to a mock draft. How do you kind of keep that fundamental like thread of truth all the way through it without getting like sucked in?
Yeah, it's tough. I will say one thing that I did very early on in my career was, and I kind of find everybody has this own evolution of their self-efficacy and their confidence and their ability to step into a field and have a voice. But as I've gotten more and more experience, I'm going to be honest, I don't consume a lot of other content from other places until I have fully formulated the opinion myself and had the exposure. So that's kind of been a fun part of, in the midst of the transition, is I'm now looking at players through, with one of my shows, a very team-specific lens with a very specific scheme. And then you get outside that box. And at Draft Network, we had this outstanding team of like 6-7 scouts on the staff. And you relied on each other. So I'm getting exposures to first guys now and seeing guys. I'm like, oh, I really don't agree. I think we're way too high or way too low here. And that's always my favorite part of kind of this last 10-day stretch is getting myself out of the weeds. But I have found it's been much easier the last couple of years to just kind of be comfortable in my own skin, know what you know what you don't, acknowledge it's okay to not know some things, but operate at your own pace and operate within your own bubble to allow yourself to have an authentic thought before you allow yourself to wander and get outside.
Just want to acknowledge Steve Shattuck for giving us a super chat. A couple of bucks in there. I'm going to get to your question
Steve.
when we get to the listener questions in just a moment, Steve. So we are going to ask you a question, but we'll get there when we get there. I want to just say one thing about Draft Dudes in terms of peak podcasting, which was the live episode with the dogs, back to back. That was some of the best content I've ever heard from a show, pretty much ever. And it sounded like it was really good fun to record. It sounded great.
Absolutely.
Anyone who hasn't listened to that show, go back and watch it. It's the same feed, isn't it? Podcast feed that you're operating on now, I think. So you don't have to go back too far. Was it Senior Bowl?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was the last 2 days of practice at the season. So I think Wednesday and Thursday of that week, kind of the last week in January.
Absolutely fantastic stuff. I want to go back to last year, and you guys adopted #OurLions, and it was a heck of a year for us. Dismay first half of the year to, I mean, something that we couldn't have ever dreamed of. I don't think we've had such a run since I've been a fan. I remember going 5-0 early on in a year, maybe a decade ago, but I don't think we've gone 8-2 in a 10-game stretch for 20 years. What did you make of the down and up nature of our season?
Kind of a weird team. You felt like the talent was there, right? Like early on, the offense was as productive as they were, but the defense really struggled and giving up a lot of points. I think they gave it, what was it? It was averaging like 30 points or so over the first 6-7 games of the season. I think that Miami game was the last one, and then I think you guys bounced back and beat, was it Green Bay the following week, and picked Rodgers off 3 times, and this is where this is one of the things when we talk about team building and why Locked On NFL Scouting has the angle that it does is the appreciation of time that it takes to accomplish something. And you think about Coach Campbell and Brad Holmes and everything that they've been preaching, and just knowing that changing a losing culture is extremely difficult, especially when you're in a division. And I know this as good as anybody, right? You're treading water. You're trying to chase the team that you're generally perceiving to be a lock for 12 wins and has a future Hall of Fame quarterback, and trying to close the distance in the division. And it just kind of creates this perpetual cycle of it's not good enough. It's not good enough. So we need to make a change. And then you go back to square one all over again. And you have to strip down what was a halfway built up team before you ever really get over the hump. And for Detroit to have made the strides that they did, I think it's a great testament to the messaging of Coach Campbell, the integrity of the players that have been established, their willingness to invest in some key areas, particularly the offensive line. And I know that that's an area that has some potential turnover coming with the guard spots here, but obviously the selection of Penei Sewell has reaped big time benefits for Detroit early on. Ben Johnson, from a coaching perspective, I think the players really grasping that scheme, especially down the stretch. Detroit really figured it out. I think turnovers wise, they hardly turned the ball over in the second half of the year. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I think all of those things it's just that's why when you commit to do what Detroit did, where we're going to trade Matt Stafford and we're going to make this paradigm shift of who we are as an organization, you as ownership have to trust that process and let it play out, because this is what can happen if you are patient enough to fully see the vision through with the people you commit to.
And sorry, just specifically in terms of like the draft coverage around like last year, obviously with the number 2 pick and us taking Aiden Hutchinson, but obviously there was all of that noise around Thibodeau and then obviously Trayvon Walker. How looking back now, like as Captain Hindsight at your coverage of like Hutchinson versus those guys, how do you kind of feel about whether what you kind of like your summations came out in terms of how Hutchinson played compared to those two?
I think Aiden delivered exactly what my expectations were when you're watching Michigan play that season in 2021 in college, and you kind of realize with the resume and the motor and the athletic profile, like, and now the production's really in line. Like, wow, like this dude might be edge one, right? And of course, he was not. It was Trayvon Walker, but I don't know if Trent Baalke would change it if he had a mulligan right now. But if I were Trent Baalke, I would change it if I had a mulligan right now. So I think Aiden, the appeal with Aiden was I get to meet him in Los Angeles ahead of the Super Bowl last winter and before he got drafted, and getting a chance to speak with him on the camera and off the camera became very apparent. Like, this dude is a consummate professional already. Like, he gets it. The way he takes care of his body, his individual process, his training regimen, he takes it very seriously. And when you are going through the interview process and getting to know these players, and somebody is so organized with their thoughts of this is my process to be the best professional athlete that I can be, and you already have that structure in isolation on your own, I think it speaks volumes of the work ethic that you're going to bring to being as good of a player as you can be. And I think that's why Aiden had the success that he did. And I think those other guys are going to be highly successful too. But I didn't meet Trayvon Walker, and I didn't meet Kayvon Thibodeau, but I met Aiden Hutchinson. So I'm not the least bit surprised that he was able to have a seamless transition to the pro game.
And it's amazing because that polished nature of his was actually being used against him late in the stretch. It was like, oh, he's being too groomed. He's, he knows exactly what to say, and he's not as raw as these guys who are just like letting their feelings go. And it's like, well, maybe he just cares. Like, I just found it such a bizarre thing. Let's move on to feelings for the Lions for next year. Obviously, it was a great stretch to end. After this next draft, we don't know how it's going to go. Got a bit of previous from Brad Holmes, but I mean, maybe there's some regression to the mean in his drafting luck, potentially. How do you think that the Lions are going to do, given an average draft for 2023? Do you think they're worthy kind of division favourites right now?
I think so. I think with the momentum, you certainly have to respect what they were able to do to close the season. And you definitely get the feeling in the sense that this is a team that's going to be able to add. This is not a team like Minnesota where they won a bunch of games and now they're in the midst of kind of transitioning and trying to make parallel moves but get cheaper. Or Chicago, I just think, has a long way to go still in the trenches, and the offensive line has shown some life, but the defensive line needs a lot of help, and they've spent a lot in the back seven. And I certainly think that defense needs more help versus the foundation that Detroit has. And look, anytime you move away from a quarterback and a guy who's got only a handful of career starts, it's difficult to project that team moving forward. So I think Detroit right now has the most stability of any team within the division. They obviously have a ton of draft capital at their disposal to work with and make a few impact selections. And you're not going to bat 1,000, and you just have to be comfortable with that. But law of averages says with the draft capital that they have, they're going to get a couple needle movers as new rookies put into this mix. And with that being the case, I do think they deserve to be considered the favorites in the North right now.
Your mock draft that you released a couple of days ago on Locked On NFL Scouting, you had the Lions pick Witherspoon and Skoronski at 18, which I think a lot of people will be surprised about the fact that he was still there. What do you think if we stand pat at 6 and 18, what do you think a perfect draft would be for the Lions, realistically?
I think Witherspoon's a great addition, and I know that adding Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is a guy who's capable of playing in the slot, and now you have Cameron Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley. You've got these names that are there, but are any of them long-term staples? Gardner-Johnson on a 1-year deal. Cameron Sutton, I think, is probably best suited to play in the nickel, and playing on the outside, I think you've got some flexibility there to add a staple piece. And I just think going back to why it was important for ownership to have patience with Dan Campbell and what can happen when you really let a process seep in, and you preach about culture and the kinds of players you want. It's eye roll inducing at times because it's intangibles and you can't see it and have a definitive piece of evidence for it. I think the way Witherspoon plays the game is exactly everything that, from what we heard on Hard Knocks, this team wants. And because of that, I think that's an ideal pick at a premium position that they do have a need at. And then at 18,
it could go so many ways.
Yeah, I just pick a good player, right? Like, I'd love to see him draft Mozzie Smith personally. Like, I like Ali McNeil, but Mozzie Smith, I think, has a chance to be a really special player. And again, the same thing: physical, tone setters up front, continuing to get better in the trenches. They've invested so much in the offensive line. The defensive line's kind of coming around, but an anchor like Mozzie Smith, as somebody who I think could be a 3-down player, I just think he also fits the MO. And of course, it's another Michigan guy on the defensive line, and that feels like low-hanging fruit. But that would be, if I were Brad Holmes, that would be what I would be aspiring for with those picks. And if somebody that's ranked significantly higher than Mozzie Smith falls to 18, then I'd just let the board fall my way and make that decision if I had to cross that bridge.
And in terms of the kind of value pick, and if we just look at corner, how much do you see as the value of taking, say, Witherspoon? If Witherspoon's your CB1 and taking him at 6, compared to, say, taking Deontay Banks or Joey Porter if they're there at 18?
I just don't know. I think all of the guys that are being discussed, non-quarterbacks, other than like Bijan Robinson, and I'm assuming we're not going to open up the can of worms and bring that name up here. I see Matt, I see there. The other defensive linemen who are being discussed in the lexicon of like the top 10, they all have a question for me. Whereas Witherspoon, I think, he's just a little bit more of a direct projection. And I think Banks and Porter are very scheme-specific starters, where I do think Witherspoon has a little bit more fluidity to be able to thrive in both press man, off man, and zone coverages, as compared to, I think Porter and Banks are like, you got to play those dudes in somebody's face and let them get physical to the line of scrimmage and then flip and turn and carry them up the field. And if you don't do that with those guys, then I have some questions about how effective they're going to be. So it's you could make the case, say, yeah, if Tyree Wilson's there or if Jalen Carter's there, draft those guys and then come back and get a corner. And you would have a very hard time being mad at that result too, because they're all good players. But if I'm taking into account trying to get into the mindset of Holmes and Campbell, and then coveting versatility to be able to do as many different things as possible, that was why I brought the names Witherspoon and Mozzie Smith to the table, because I think Mozzie Smith, despite the fact that he has 1/2 of 1 sack in his entire college career, I think he can be a 3rd-down player in the NFL. I think he's just got to grow and develop there. But in the meantime, you're going to get a stalwart play on 1st and 2nd down. And he's explosive, and you want to bet on the traits there. So that's kind of just me getting, trying to get into their heads. But that's the most fun part about the draft, is the if not X, then Y, and doing those combinations all the way down the board. And it really makes your brain melt when a team has as much capital as Detroit has, because there's so many different directions that they could possibly go.
We have so many questions and not very much time, so I'm going to try and quickfire these as much as possible. First, to get to our super chatter, Steve asks, where does Mr. Krabs have this year's wide receiver class rated? I know it's not perhaps the biggest one at the top compared to recent years, but there seems like there's a lot of names in there. Maybe just a little bit further down.
I think Jackson Smith-Njigba has the luxury of having like the question with his resume be the furthest removed from recency bias, because he didn't have a good season this past year at Ohio State because he dealt with the hamstring most of the year. Well, then Jordan Addison didn't run as fast as we thought he was, and he came in super small. And Quentin Johnson has build-up speed, and his 10-yard split wasn't great. And you think about some of these other receivers, and it's just like, okay, well, Downs is 5'7". Zay Flowers reportedly got down to 160 at the end of the season last year. And it's like, well, Jackson Smith-Njigba runs routes outstanding, and just go back, and everybody's already accepted you have to go back to the 2021 tape. So I don't really like a lot of these names as first-round names. I do think Jackson Smith and Jigba is the most secure resume, or the most complete athletic profile, especially with the agilities that he posted with that elite change of direction skills. So don't love this class. I think there's a lot of good value on day 2, though.
Would that be like, say, A.T. Perry, Tillman, someone like that, round about like 45, 50?
Yeah, I think Tillman would be a great player to bet on. I would bet on Tillman before I bet on Hyatt as well. I just think Hyatt's a little too one-dimensional right now to feel good about that year 1, year 2 projection. So if you're a team that's trying to win games now, I think Tillman could move the needle for you now more, and I would absolutely be betting on those players in that window as compared to taking a player, say, at 18 or in the 20s in the first round, unless it was Jackson Smith and Jigba.
I'm going to combine 2 questions here, one from James Harris and one from Adostil. James says, do we pick at 6 or trade? And Adostil says, is there any historical data on the merits between trading up or trading down or staying where you are? Are trade value charts used anymore, or are they just a way for fans to justify things? So are we moving? And I don't think there is any data to support whether one is better than the other, but do you believe that one is better than the other, or do you like just letting the draft fall to you?
I think it depends on where you're at. And when you're a team like Detroit, who has this surplus of picks, if you've got a guy that you absolutely love and you know is tailor-made, or you feel like you have a super high confidence for, go get him, right? Like, don't be afraid to go make a splash, and extra draft picks on day 3, you can snap your fingers and come up with relatively easy, as long as you're not super handcuffed with draft capital. So I would say predictively, I wouldn't move down from 6 in this class, because that feels like you're still within the fringe to get a blue chip player. And I know that everybody's boards are kind of frail right now as far as how many players they really, really love from team to team. Draft value charts, everybody kind of use it. There's no universal one, but teams still do absolutely use them to try to have historical context and justify. I know there was one that Rich Hill put out, and then there was, I think Harvard did one recently, and then the Jimmy Johnson one's the historical one. And everybody kind of has their own model that they use. And that's why I think you see some discrepancy from team to team on what the compensation is for similar moves. But there is still absolutely value for teams to have some kind of measured quantification of what draft picks are worth.
So would maybe trading down at 18 be better?
I think that's an area where, if the board doesn't fall the right way, you can probably drop 10 spots, get extra draft capital. I would aspire to get more extra draft capital for 2024. I don't know how much more with the picks you already have on day 2. I'd be trying to load up in more players in this year's class, just because I don't think it's a great class. And probably get a player that's more reflective of the value, unless you are going to take a player at a non-premium position, which would be kind of like I still think you can get good players, but they might be tight ends or guards or running backs at 18. And like that would be the kinds of positions that you'd be expecting to get the best value at.
Bill asks, this feels like the most winnable and losable draft that I can recall. No consensus number 1 quarterback, which I don't agree with, but I'm reading it as read. No consensus number 1 wide receiver. No consensus number 1 tackle. Is this the draft and the week that defines Brad Holmes' tenure as general manager?
I think this can be the week that defines the rebuild if you hit it out of the park. The challenge is, don't come up empty-handed, don't panic, and don't get cute. So whatever your objectives are, whatever you're hoping to do, whether that's just draft the best player available definitively, if we know we have these 3 spots that we want to address, if that means a run starts on a position early and you have to get aggressive and go up and get a guy to make sure that you're achieving that objective for your team, just go do that. But I think that what will be a victory for Brad Holmes and the Lions here is getting players that allow this team to build on the momentum that it had last year, have a winning season in 2023, make the postseason, win a darn playoff game. And that would be what you would point to and say, this is why we did it. This is why we transitioned and traded Matt Stafford, was to have a young nucleus and foundation. It very much fashions the team that's sitting behind me that did all that stuff in 2019 and got rid of Ryan Tannehill, who's not Matt Stafford by any means, but they loaded up on all these draft picks and they loaded up on cap space. to have a young nucleus to then kind of transition how they went about collecting players to really try to have a strong nucleus and have a definitive 3 to 5 year window where they're going to be able to compete. And for Detroit, this draft class for Brad Holmes is all about taking the next step. So whatever you have to do to get however many players you feel is necessary, that you can look at the finished product and say, we're ready to be really aggressive the next couple of years and let's try and go win some games.
Steve, pick your favorite question remaining.
Let's have a look what we've got left. So James Harrison says the Lions' run defense needs to improve. Obviously, we really struggled with that last year. You mentioned Mazi Smith. Any other draft prospects on that wish list for yourself? We've not really talked about the linebacker. We've not, other than Mazi Smith, we've not talked about the trenches. So is there anyone you got your eye
on? If you want to go with a non-premium position, I think Jack Campbell's an absolute stud. I think he's a 3-down linebacker, very physical. I think he should definitively be the first linebacker off the board. I don't think it really matters what kind of system that you play. He's super instinctive. He's 250 pounds. He's a plus athlete with plus production. So if you want to help your run defense, especially with a guy like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson now in the secondary with the versatility that he has to kind of move around your defense, I think Campbell is as complementing Malcolm Rodriguez would be a really nice addition for Detroit. And that if you were going to stay on the defensive line, Keanu Benton would be the other name that I would mention from Wisconsin as somebody who is probably going to make a living in the B gap at the NFL level, but he can get down in the A gap and he can play shaded alignments on the center, and it's 310 pounds. And I think he's already a better pass rusher than Mazi Smith. I just don't think he anchors as consistently as the early downs as Mazi Smith does. So that's a little bit more of an upside play if you wanted to go a different direction there.
All right, final question from those there because we're pushing for time. We will go for Drew Forsyth, and apologies to anyone who's asked a question who we haven't got to. Me and Steve will stay on for a little bit and answer them in just a second. Drew asks, how do you sort through all the noise from this time in the season to arrive at solid opinions as to what will take place in the draft?
It's impossible, right? Because everything that's out there right now is out there for a reason. Well, that's one of the things that we've kind of learned the hard way over the last few years of doing draft coverage is, as you create relationships, people are going to give you their version of reality. But the reality of any decision that any team is going to make is it's going to come down to one or two people. And the one or two people in all of those rooms who make that decision might not be the ones who are talking. So somebody for a team might say, yeah, we really like so-and-so, and hoping to draft him at pick number 6 for Detroit, right? But then at the end of the day, if the person that said that wasn't Brad Holmes or Dan Campbell, it usually doesn't matter, right? So all the areas, you get a lot of scouts that are talking, you get a lot of agents that are talking with trying to put things out there for the benefit of their clients and their players. So if you're going to actually buy into smokescreen season, you got to look at the track record of the people who are sharing things with you if you're a general consumer, and decide who gets BS'd and who doesn't get BS'd. And then if you are trying to consume smokescreen season as somebody in the industry, you have to kind of reflect on how frequently this person shares, what motivation they would have to share, and understand that your relationship as somebody in the media space gives them a motivation to maybe tell you something that might not actually be true. So it is all just a big game of chess and chicken, and it's a lot of fun. It's part of the intrigues why we love it as much as we do. But anything the last week or so before the draft is pretty hard to buy into for me, just because that's when all this BS reaches a fever pitch.
Is your spidey senses tingling about any particular smokescreen that you'd care to give us some insight in, Kyle? What do you think is an absolute load of nonsense?
I I think the McShay, I don't know of any team that likes Anthony Richardson from the other day. Is
Oh,
one
I
that
want him so much.
I'm like, I have a really hard time believing that there's nobody out here that likes Anthony. Now, Anthony Richardson might end up being QB4 when it's all said and done. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. I think Stroud is a perfect fit for McDaniels. So if Stroud does slip a little bit, I don't think you'll see 4 quarterbacks in the first 4 or 5 picks. I would buy kind of the quarterbacks are slipping in general. But nobody likes Anthony Richardson is the one that I'm pretty skeptical on. I'm pretty confident that he's going to be a top half of the first round guy.
All right. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on. It's a real thrill to talk to you. Let us know what you're doing for the draft on Locked On NFL Scouting.
Yeah, so we're going to have a live stream on Thursday and Friday night for the entirety of the first, second, and third rounds. Joe Marino and I on YouTube at Locked On NFL Scouting. And then on day 3, we are going to be on intermittently at the end of each round for about 30 minutes to just talk about the big picture things that are happening. So we're not going to do the marathon all 3 days. We've done that. And it's fun. It is a fun
madness.
Marathon, but I'm not mad about getting a couple hours to catch my breath for all the action and create some content beyond just being on a camera for endless hours on Saturday. So live streams on Thursday and Friday, and then live shows throughout the day on Saturday.
Fantastic. Do go and check out Kyle at Grinding the Tape on Twitter. Thank you so much for coming on, Kyle. We've got our final draft thoughts on Monday, our betting show on Wednesday, how ironic, and then we're also doing our draft show too. 30 different guests from around the league, covering each team individually. We're not locked on, but we're trying our best. Kyle, hopefully we'll talk to you again at some point in the future. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Have a great one. All right. Enjoy the draft.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
All right, everybody. I have to apologize to Carlton Wood especially because out of the questions that we just picked at random, all 3 of his got missed. And I'm really, really sorry, man. That sucks. So we're going to go through those now. I got my dinner, though, on in like 10 minutes. So so we're going to have to get through them quick. Go for one of Carlton's first. How do you assess or measure character, not talent or performance in draft prospects? So, I mean, yeah.
I think you've got to. This is where your scouting network comes in, and I would imagine you've absolutely got to try and get some inside information from the kind of college network in terms of what that person's been like in the locker room for the last 3-4 seasons in college, rather than buying into, as Carl said, there's a lot of smoke screens out there.
I mean, for me, I think the real value is talking to the guy in person, which is obviously super difficult, but you can get a lot of character kind of tells from watching the person take interviews, and that happens a lot during the draft process. You have the Draft Network that interview players on the regular. You have PFF that used to do that a lot with what used to be 2-for-1 drafts became Tailgate, and now is obviously unfortunately finished. There's lots of podcasts out there that interview prospects. So if you're interested on a guide, try and find one, because you get an insight to how they think. And, they're going to be drilled on how to answer these questions, but some of them can't help themselves. And that it reflects, like, not many people are Aiden Hutchinson in terms of how polished they are in that sort of thing. So do that. And then if there's any kind of press or media that can write stuff, there's some smoke, but the season to season stuff, these guys are out there writing the news for their local teams, a lot of them. So
for every Aiden Hutchinson, there's a Laramie Tunsil.
Yeah. Carlton also asked, how can Mr. Irrelevant become a starting NFL QB? This one's easy. This one's super easy. You put him into a situation where all of the quarterbacks get injured, and you put him in a system where it devalues the quarterback position. And this is why I don't like Will Levis. Will Levis is a pro-ready quarterback. Will Levis has had experience calling NFL plays in the huddle. That's one of the reasons why he's so coveted. He's gone in with like 3 different calls in the huddle, which is hard. It's really hard work. But the Shanahan system and the McVay system are notoriously quarterback friendly. And quarterback friendly means
just
easy to
simplified
operate.
offense.
Simplified.
Yeah.
Like, Give the quarterback something to work in, and that's why CJ Beathard worked in that system, and that's why Nick Mullins worked in that system. So when Will Levis plays in that system, I'm sorry guys, he might grade at 90 on PFF, but I'm not thinking that's a really good quarterback in a position that's actually kind of giving him adversity. You have a look at Bryce Young, and Alabama's meant to be a really easy place to play. Give them no receivers and a crap offensive line. Go out there and say, try and perform in that environment, and he did super well. In a team that's meant to be good, but it wasn't. Alabama was crap, and I know that Kentucky is not a great team, but it had a reasonable offensive line, and it was coached very, very well in 2021. So that's why you can get Mr. Irrelevant, and they look great, because well, it isn't all on you, especially when you have a lot of great underneath guys. You put in Christian McCaffrey as a running back. You put in Brandon Ayuk and
Deebo Samuel.
That's the one. I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to look good in that situation, especially if
George
you've got
Kittle
someone like Yeah, and then you got Shanahan behind it all. I mean, that's why running backs look great in that system too, right? It's all part of the same thing. So,
I mean, let's not knock the fact that Brock did play pretty well.
Yeah, massively. I mean, he wasn't great at was it Iowa State? I can't remember which one it was, but he wasn't a great college quarterback. But it's why I have confidence in some of these day 3 guys, because sometimes in the lottery you hit, and someone who wasn't that great at college or had some flaws actually just overcomes some flaws. Carlton, to finish Carlton off here, he says, has Carl got a strategy or opinion on value in drafting, recovering or injured players and even redshirting them? What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I think obviously the Jameson Williams is one example, but then there was also, I think, the Ravens with David Ajabo last season. I think you've got to be pretty confident that the player is really, really special if you're going to be willing to, give up an entire season. I don't think Ajabo came back at all, or maybe played like in the last
back
couple
end
of games.
Of last year. He got
a couple of
games.
snaps.
Yeah,
but I would imagine that these guys are signing a 4-year contract with a 1-year option. If you're going to immediately lose 25% of that playing time, then you would imagine that player has to be 25% better than the next best player in their position, and you've got to be in a position from a roster point of view and a organizational point of view that you've got the time to do it. And the Ravens are one of those organizations where they're always looking 2 or 3 steps ahead, whereas someone like Arizona, it's always like panic stations. So it's got to be situational, but it's got to be someone who is a real talent.
The beautiful thing about what Brad Holmes has done in free agency is that he's filled gaps in the roster so well that there's not a massive glaring need anywhere. Yes, you could take a corner. It would be great to get someone in that room, especially if he was right about Cam Sutton being best at nickel, which I hadn't really even considered. I'd heard he was versatile, but actually playing him at nickel full time, I didn't think about at all, really. I thought he'd be him and Mosley, CJ as the nickel, and then we're drafting a developmental guy or someone in the rotation. But so cornerback's a need, but we'll get by this year if we don't grab one. And defensive tackle, well, that would be great, 100%. But we did improve in run defense down the stretch, and Aleem alongside Benito and why is my thoughts escaping me? Benito Jones and who's the other defensive tackle? Oh my god. Why can't I think about who the Lions' depth chart is?
Van Ness?
No.
Levi.
No, not Levi. Benito Jones and Isaiah Buggs. So you've got those 3 guys, and while that's not by any means, needed, top of the NFL in terms of DTs, you'd get by with that group. And, last 8 games or so, apart from against Carolina, they were absolutely on fire in some of those games. It shut down the Giants, shut down other running-based teams. We look super good. So there's promise there. You don't need that. With Anzalone coming back, you don't need an inside linebacker. You can survive where you are. Almost everywhere in the team is better now than it was last year. We're adding to a great roster now already. So if you want to take a guy who's fallen a bit because of injury and stash him for 24. You can do that, but you're right. You've got to be certain on the evaluation. You've got to be... It's a luxury pick at the end of the day. It's like picking running back at the top of round 1. You better be damn sure you're right. But if you are, 3 years of that plus some fifth-year option and then maybe some tags if you have to, that's worth a lot. Final question before I go for dinner. Ash Soden, our very own Ash, asks hang on, I think there might have been one more. Anyway, Ash asks, when does talent begin to outweigh positional value? E.g., Quinton Nelson, how does his talent outweigh the positional value of guard, and where is that point for Bijan this year?
So I think I mock drafted Bijan to 21 at the Chargers. I also think maybe Tampa Bay at 19 could be where Bijan goes. I don't think Bijan is making it any further. Like, I know a lot of people have mocked him to the Cowboys at 26. He ain't making 26. Like, someone's going to take him higher up, or maybe the Cowboys come up for him. But I reckon 19 for the Bucks or 21 for the Chargers is where Bijan is headed.
In terms of the positional value question, it really depends how generational they are of a prospect. Do I want a blue chip guard or do I want an average tackle? Give me the talent. Give me the talent every time at the same draft position. Quinton Nelson obviously has been worth it. But again, you've got to be so sure in your evaluation. And being sure in your evaluation, as PFF, that 2 for 1 podcast used to say, being sure in your evaluation is a surefire way to fail too often because you overdraft. So you've got to be so careful. I would almost always try and shy away from that sort of thing, really, and just use conventional wisdom. But sometimes someone falls too far and you can make value there. It's just a case-by-case basis. For Bijan, he's my number 1 player in the draft this year. But the positional value... What?
Matt. I mean, you can only have one sweetheart. Like, you've already expressed your love for Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
You can't have Bijan as well.
You
have to choose.
Yes, I know, but that's a positional value question. If you were going to say, do you want Richardson or Bijan at 6, I'm obviously going Richardson, and I would be so delighted with that pick. But in terms of pure quality at the time, I think Bijan is a better running back than Richardson is a quarterback. That's how I'm ranking that. So Bijan is my number...
But the positional value of a quarterback is better than the positional
yeah,
value
absolutely.
of a running back.
But the point was positional value versus talent. So for me, on the talent board, Bijan's number 1 in the draft. But on a draft board, where would I draft him? I would start thinking about it at 18. If he's there at 18, I think about it long and hard. I don't know. I'd be delighted if we drafted him, but I wouldn't be sure it would be the best thing to do. I think you're right that the Bucks at 19 is a really nice thought. I do think the Eagles will think about it at 10. They've never shown any history of doing something like that before, but they haven't. They go in
trenches.
But they haven't had this good of a team in a long time, and they can afford to take that luxury pick to take them over the top. Like, their team hasn't got that much worse than last year. If anything, it's about the same place. So,
but the Eagles are good because they don't draft for this year.
Howie's a great GM. Yeah, you're probably right. He probably won't do that. I can see the Vikings taking him because I can see them cutting Dalvin Cook if their cap situation is as bad as it seems like it is, and it would give Kirk Cousins a way to win. Like, they need to do something, so maybe I can see that, but I don't know. It's a really hard question. For Bijan, I think you start thinking about it outside the top 15 picks. I think Green Bay's at 15. They won't consider him. And then from then on, I think you should think about it.
I think the Chargers is a really nice fit for him.
Yeah, especially if they have to get rid of their incumbent.
Eckler, yeah.
Right. Guys, it's been quick and fast compared to normal, but I hope you enjoyed that quickfire episode. We'll be back on Monday. I might do some daily shows in the week of the draft, just running down the position groups and the top 10 players at each position. I might try and make it a 10-minute quick show, possibly. Haven't decided whether I'm definitely doing that or not. Thanks to Steve Shattuck, for his $1.99 super chat. All of that really, really helps us build a really great thing here. Steve, thanks for doing the interview with me, as always. And
Anytime.
see you Monday? Maybe.
Let's talk off air.
All right. Guys, we'll see you soon.
Cheers.